So I've been collecting longer than PUP Parade has been around. And I remember when it was announced being very excited for this series. I thought they were a great product. When I received them, I was very pleased with what I got, especially for the price that I paid. But fast forward 5 years later, and I feel like my sentiments towards PUP Parade has changed in a negative way. And I don't think I'm the only one. I can't tell if PUP Parade is getting worse over time when it comes to quality. They've done things like change their bases, which doesn't make any sense. Or maybe the competition is getting that much better. They're even expanding into other markets with their L size and their XL size. And given my current negative sentiments, is it even worth paying attention to? Are they even adding value, or are they just scaled up versions of what we see here? And personally, I don't know the answer to this. I stopped paying attention to PUP Parade and have no idea where they stand in 2025. But I think I know someone who can help us out.
Hey Senpai, it's your Kohai, and I'm back with another in-depth review. Today we're going to be starting a 3-part mini-series about pop-up parades and whether they're worth your money in 2025. To do so, we're going to be taking a look at a standard pop-up parade, a pop-up parade L, and a pop-up parade XL. When planning this video, we realized this was going to be an enormous undertaking, hence why we're splitting up this series into 3 separate parts. In this video, we're going to be discussing pop-up parade in general and starting our in-depth review of a standard pop-up parade figure. Subsequently, in the following video, we will have an in-depth review of a pop-up parade L, and in the last video, we will have an in-depth review of a pop-up parade XL, as well as our aggregate conclusions on pop-up parade as a whole. Specifically in this video, we will be focusing on the pop-up parade Albedo dress version, the Taito Masterpiece Albedo white dress version, and doing a quick comparison to the Taito's colorful line. Before getting to the review, this mini-series was made possible by Lonely Pillow, and as usual, we like to make sure we're all on the same page about the brand Pop-Up Parade. All of the information I'm about to share with you can be found directly on the Good Smile website. Originally, Good Smile hired 3 minds to create the brand, 1 specialized in manufacturing and 2 specialized in making prize figures. Their original mission was to create affordable figures that appealed to new collectors, a global audience, and could be produced quickly. First things first, mold sizes and the amount of material directly affect the final cost. So a smaller size, closer to a 1/10 scale, or about 17 to 18 centimeters tall, was chosen. When making figures, many pieces are hand-painted, which can make the process very expensive. So they chose to limit the shading to the hair, or only pieces that they felt were necessary. In order to appeal to a wider audience and to keep manufacturing costs low, they chose specific outfits and poses to intentionally keep the figures less complicated. In doing so, their first pop-up parade released at 3,900 yen, and the total production time was about 4 months from start to finish. The chosen name for the brand was Pop-Up Parade, pop-up meaning they wanted the figures to pop up into your collection due to the quick production time, and parade meaning a line of figures that you could display because you could collect so many since they were affordable and small. The first figure they released was Hatsune Miku, of course, but the first figures to really gain the media attention were Chocolate and Vanilla from Nekopara. As the brand expanded, they began to cater to classic older anime that was more popular in the West, have kept up with current anime, and even explored more niche characters that you rarely see scales of. The lineup has also expanded into many different variants, and in order to better understand this, we can take a look at their website. To start us off, we have the standard pop-up parades, and these are non-scale figures, which means they are not made to a scale, but to a designated height of around 17 to 18 centimeters. Normally, you won't see any height differences unless the characters are meant to be displayed with other characters, such as Anya from Spy Family. Good Smile groups the rest of the variants under the tab Other, and here we can see the Pop-Up Parade L, which has a designated height of 20 to 24 centimeters. They also have the BQ, which stands for Beach Queens. This is the same lineup as Wave in the past, but now seems to be under the brand Pop-Up Parade. They are about the same size as a standard Pop-Up Parade, and they all come with hexagonal bases that look like sand, so you can link up multiple characters to make them look like they're standing on a beach. Here we have Swatcho, which are sitting figures. These do not come with a base, and they're meant to either sit on something or on the edge of something like Noodle Stompers. This figure comes with an alternate face, which is kind of cool. This is the SP line, which stands for special. They're the same size as the Ls, but come with a special surprise. They're typically more intricate, and in this case, this one's more textured. Some of the other SPs come with different gimmicks, such as light-up pieces. And finally, we have the XL series, which is meant to be around 40 centimeters tall. We're not sure if this is a permanent rule, but so far all of the XLs have either a matching standard size or are meant to be displayed with a standard size such as the Gurren Lagann. So now that we're on the same page about what Pop-Up Parade is, we can see they're entering many different markets within figure collecting. So this is what prompted us to make the series. Are they even worth paying attention to in the current market? Are they competitive to what they're competing against? The standard Pop-Up Parade size is directly competing against prize figures such as the Taito Masterpiece line, which has greatly increased the quality of prize figures over the past year. The L series is arguably in a market of its own, since it's between the cost of a price figure and a normal scale figure. But now we can see the Chinese companies starting to encroach on that market. The XL series is already so expensive that it costs as much as many 1/4 scales. So this is what we hope to shed some light on. Remember, this is going to be a 3-part series, and this is part 1, where we're going to be taking a look at a standard size Pop-Up Parade. Today we're taking a look at the Pop-Up Parade Albedo dress version. This is a non-scale with an MSRP of 4,800 yen. Here I have the current Pop-Up Parade standard size box. I say current because the L and XL sizes are in cardboard boxes, so in the future they might move to a cardboard box. I think that would be very lame for them to do because this is a clear plastic box with a large open window. You can actually see the figure, and some collectors like taking off the plastic wrap and displaying the figure in the box. Taking a look at the design elements of the box, each Pop-Up Parade figure has a color scheme for the cardboard in the background, and for Albedo it is black, white, gold, and purple for her dress. On the front we can see the brand name and the version of the figure. The brand name continues throughout the box on the side and on the back, but on the other side we have the Good Smile brand. I always liked the Pop-Up Parade figure boxes. They're very contemporary in design, and I always thought that they're very impressive for an affordable figure. Here's the first layer of inner packaging. Initial impressions, this figure is 7¼ inches tall, or about 18½ centimeters. So they pretty much hit that designated height if you keep in mind that the base is about a centimeter tall, and so really she's 17½ centimeters tall herself. This is definitely the worst figure we reviewed on this channel, albeit it's the most affordable figure that we've reviewed, and it definitely shows. There are tons of seams, lots of flashing, some rough textures, but there's actually more shading than I thought there would be. They said that they were going to have shading in the hair and in areas they deemed important, and there's definitely one area they deemed very important, which I'll reveal in a little while. So with that, let's take a closer look. In general, all of the paints are matte, except for the pearlescent paint on her dress, which I'm actually really surprised that they use, since Pop-Up Parade usually only uses matte paints, and they seem very flat to me. Starting with her hair is dark purple, and they've gone in with 2 bands of black airbrushing here and here. For her horns, they are a satin white, and they've actually added some light brown airbrushing here and here to give them more depth. This is an interesting choice because Albedo normally has gloss horns. For her face, there's not a lot of detail here. Both her eyes and her eyebrows are decals. They seem to be set nicely, and for her mouth, we just have a small thin line that is painted a pinkish red. Moving on to one of her more prominent features, which are her wings, they have not added any shading here. They are just painted a jet black color. It's interesting because on all of the Albedo figures that we own, there is banding on the wings to make them look like bird's feathers. And here they have added nothing, so it's obvious they didn't deem this feature to be worthy enough of shading. But you know what they did deem worthy of shading? Because it not only has one, but 2 areas of shading are her big old titties that are almost the size of her head. I think these are the largest breasts I've ever seen on a licensed Albedo figure. There is shading in the middle of her cleavage here, and then black shading on the cups of her dress here. Speaking of her dress, this is one of the features I like the most because they actually added pearlescent paint. They added on the top here and the bottom of her dress here. Moving on to the ribbon, again, we start to lose our quality. It's extremely flat, and there are areas where the paint comes out of the lines on her side here, in the middle of her torso here, and on the other side as well. For the rest of her skin, on the top half of her body, the finish is not very good. It's very rough and plasticky in most places. But for her legs, they added a nice soft matte finish. For her accessories, the necklace, they at least used a shiny silver paint for the middle of the necklace. And then for the jewels, they added a gloss paint. There's a little bit of paint bleeding, but it's mostly clean. For her gloves, again, not a lot of detail here. It's just a solid matte light purple color, no shading. And for her shoes, it is a gloss black, also with no shade. Where this figure starts to show its prize level quality is in the modeling, because there is a ton of flashing in the seam lines of the molds, and you can pretty much tell where every mold came together. Starting with the hair, there are really no pieces added back in because it's basically just 3 chunks. We have the bangs here, the ahego here, and the back piece here. We can see the parting lines for the mold of the hair on the sides here and here. For the horns, we have a parting line down the middle, which is extremely noticeable and very unfortunate because it's so close to her face. For her face, again, not a lot of detail here. We don't have molded lips. It's really just a bump. Moving on to the wings, we can see parting lines down the middle on both sides. Moving on to the actual sculpt of the feathers, towards the top, they're just very blocky triangles. They really don't look like feathers. We only start to see the detail of the barbs as we get towards the bottom. Moving on to the body, there's a very subtle parting line here. We can see glue where the dress meets her breast here. There's a very large parting line down her leg, and one of the most noticeable parting lines and flashing is going to be on her ribbon. There's also some flashing down the ripples of her dress, but I do appreciate that they added ripples. And finally, for the accessories, for her necklace, there's quite a bit of flashing on the ends. For her gloves, there's a parting line, although it's at least on the inside so you can't see it, that goes from her wrist to the end of her finger. And then finally, we have a parting line in the middle of her shoes. There's not much to say about the base since it's almost your basic black plastic base, but it is quite tall. It's odd because on one hand, she kind of looks like a trophy, but on the other hand, it's almost twice as tall as any of the 1/4 Spring Bunny bases, so it kind of doesn't make sense. At least it's almost the same diameter as Albedo herself, so you can easily display her with other figures. She does have plastic pegs, but at least they're thick, so she is stable. It's interesting because in the beginning, pups had hexagonal bases, and because they're just plastic injected molds, I can't really see where it's any cheaper to make it a circle, but I guess that's just the world we live in. For artistry, this dress is based off of a dress from season 4, and they did match all of the colors perfectly. The thing they didn't match is the necklace. The ends of her necklace are supposed to be hanging by thin strands of metal, and here it looks like they just strapped big metal sausages to her chest. Overall, I can tell this is Albedo, but there are a few things that are off to me. Number 1 are her overly large breasts. Number 2 is her face. Personally, I don't care for it. There's a couple different things that I think are a little bit off. Normally, her eyes are more slanted downward on the outside. Her face is longer, whereas in this figure, it's more round. And then they added no modeling to the lips, so there's just a little mound, and it looks very odd to me. This looks more like teenage Albedo than mommy Albedo. For the pose, there's more movement than I thought there was going to be, but there's still not a ton. Everything is very constricted and tight, and you can tell they intentionally made it that way in order to save on space. We have her finger on her mouth here, and then her other hand on her leg, and so she's leaning a little bit forward into a somewhat seductive pose because she's showing off her breast. Then we have her wings crisscrossed in front of her, like here, and on the back we have her hair splayed out a little bit. We do see that they added some wrinkles and frills into her dress. For Moe, I think the pose is very cute and mischievous, but the face ruins it for me, so she's not the dummy mommy I want her to be. And with that, let's give it a score. Starting with the box, I do like the box with its contemporary design and that you can see the figure from 3 sides, but you do sacrifice things such as more intricate design elements and prototype photos, so it feels very average at a 3 out of 5. Moving on to production, starting with the paint. The paint in and of itself is not inherently bad. The level of shading can get close to some scale figures, and they did use different types of paint finishes. But for the most part, the colors fall flat. There is some paint bleeding, and not all of the finishes are executed well. So it gets a 5 out of 15. For modeling, this figure has some of the worst flashing and visible part lines in our collection, including from other prize figures. but it's not bootleg quality, so it gets a 3 out of 15. The base is a black plastic circle, but at least it's translucent, so it gets a 2 out of 10. Moving on to artistry, starting with 2D versus 3D. This figure does capture the outfit that was worn in the show, but just like how animation can be inconsistent, I feel like this figure falls in the average realm of the inconsistency when portraying Albedo as a figure, so it gets a 5 out of 10. For the pose, there's actually more nuances than I expected. There's a lot more going on behind her wings, and it has a little bit of spice, so I'll give it a 6 out of 10. For the face, I don't particularly like it, but manufacturers seem to have a hard time capturing Albedo, so I feel like this goes back to the average inconsistency, so it gets a 5 out of 10. For Moe, I feel like they want me to think that she's mischievous and sexy, but all I see is a butterface and big titties that falls short of mommy Albedo that I want, so it gets a 4 out of 10. Moving on to value, objectively this figure costs 4,800 yen and weighs 232 grams, giving her a price per gram of 20.69, which is a 4 out of 5. Subjectively, you might think that you get more for your money, but the space is highly competitive, and I think there's even better prize figures for the money, so it gets a 2 out of 5. For playability and displayability, inherently I think it's very average, but the real value comes from PUP Parade's mission to be able to display a bunch of them together, so with that in mind, I think it's a 4 out of 5. This brings the total for PUP Parade's Albedo dress version to a 43 out of 100. This brings the PUP Parade Albedo into last place. If we filter by only production and artistry, it's still in last place, but by an even larger margin. This is not really surprising. It has a good value proposition, but at the end of the day, a median score on our rating system is based off of an average scale figure. So of course it's going to be outclassed. But before we really come to a conclusion about whether PUP Parade is worth your money, we need to compare it to its direct competition. Here we have our two favorite prize lines, both by Taito. We have the Colorful line and the Artist Masterpiece line. To start us off, we're going to do a quick in-depth look of each, and then we will pick out key areas of interest in order to compare the three, so we can draw a conclusion. This is the Taito Artist Masterpiece series. It's a very recent addition to prize figure lines, as they only started coming out in late 2023. They have recently become one of our favorite prize figure lines, as they redefine what prize figure quality can be. This is the Albedo limited edition white dress version. A more direct comparison would have been the black dress version, however Senpai really likes collecting the limited editions of prize figures, and so we have this one. Now keep in mind, prize figures do not have an MSRP. You win them from Crane Games, and so you can win this figure for as low as 100 yen, or if you're like us and have very mediocre luck and skill, you can spend between 2,000 to 3,000 yen. Now companies do buy and resell these, so Senpai bought this in Japan in April of 2024 for 3,700 yen. You can expect the black dress version to be a couple hundred yen cheaper. In Japan, you can find these figures for cheaper than pop-up parades, but here in the West, once you import them, you can actually end up spending more. But we have found them for less than $25 at conventions, so we still consider these to be in direct competition with pop-up parades. Taking a closer look, starting with the differences in the paint, as a whole, the quality and finish are honestly on par with pop-up parade, but the difference is in how they use them. The only shading on this figure is in her wings, but she does have the black and blue banding. For her hair, it's a translucent purple plastic with black airbrushing. The finish on the skin is still bad, and it's more plasticky and uneven than the pop-up parade. But I do appreciate that they use gloss paint for her horns. Overall, I appreciate this interpretation of the finishes more, since it's more in line with most of the scale figures we own because of the banding in her wings and the gloss of her horns. The differences start to show in modeling. Funnily enough, it has all of the same parting lines as the pop-up parade, but it looks a lot more polished because they either sanded them down or chose better spots to place them in. The ones on her horns are still noticeable, but less noticeable because they're tucked up underneath. Where her dress meets her breast is still pretty rough, and is definitely noticeable on her sash here. But overall, it looks a lot more refined. Where this figure starts to excel more than the pop-up parade is in the amount of detail. You can see there's significantly more details in the barbs of the feathers from the top all the way to the tip of the wing. There is a lot more wrinkles in her dress in the back as well as her sash. Her lips are actually somewhat modeled. The jewels at the end of her necklace are much smaller, and there's a lot more separation of the hair in the back. One thing this figure suffers from that the pop-up parade does not is fitment issues, and that's because you can actually take her apart and remove her wings. The wings have a lot of slop, and you cannot pick her up from the top, otherwise she will separate. For artistry, I do feel like they captured Albedo's essence a lot better. Her eyes are slanted downwards, and she looks a lot more elegant. This is actually sexier because you can see her purple panties peeking out a little bit, and you might not notice this in the black dress version, but it's pretty noticeable here since the dress is white. For value, this figure does not have an MSRP. If we use the price that Senpai bought it at 3,700 yen, this figure weighs 391 grams, giving it a price per gram of 9.46, which objectively is definitely a 5 out of 5. Subjectively, even if you end up paying more than the pop-up parade, when you see them side by side, I still think that you'll feel like there's more value here. Let's take a look at Taito's Coreful line, which is a step down from the masterpiece. Now, you've heard us mistakenly call it colorful this whole time, and unfortunately you're going to continue to keep hearing us call it that for the rest of the video. You see, we had to refilm this segment. For years, Senpai was convinced that Coreful was colorful in English, Coreful, because it literally says colorful on the box, and so he thought Japan was adopting a foreign word for the brand. And so talking about it in English, we use this assumed English name versus English. But when trying to find the logo for Coreful, it's not in Romanji, and Taito tells you how to pronounce it and what it means. It's a combination between core and colorful. Core does mean the center or the core characters of the series, but in Japanese they pronounce it ko-a, not core. Now here's the play on words. Ko-a sounds like kara, meaning color. So it's either a portmanteau between core and colorful, or it's just a play on words because ko-a, furu, Coreful, sounds like kara, furu, colorful in Japanese. Their intended meaning is basically core characters of a story in a colorful figure. So now that we know that core is not Romanji and is in fact core, the English pronunciation is Coreful, even though the Japanese pronounce it closer to colorful, ko-a, furu. So our apologies on this. We will continue calling it colorful for the remainder of the video since we can't undo it, but after this video we will refer to it by the proper name of Coreful. It's just the Prince Eugen situation all over again. Once again, this is a limited edition, but of the knit dress renewal version. There are a couple different versions of this figure. The original, which is white, the limited edition of the original, which is black with pantyhose, the renewal version, which is teal, and then finally this one, the limited edition of the renewal version, which is red. Senpai bought this figure in December of 2023 in Japan for 1,800 yen. In terms of paint, you'll see the same technique as on the artist's masterpiece, where there's a translucent plastic with black airbrushing. For her horns, they did use a gloss paint like the artist's masterpiece. The finish on her skin is actually a little bit better than the artist's masterpiece, but there's absolutely no shading on this figure at all. On a positive note, the emblems on her boots look really nice, and they actually added fingernail polish. For modeling, we still have parting lines, but the parting lines on her body are actually the least noticeable of the three figures. They've chosen to put them on the sides, and they've sanded them down really well. Unfortunately, on her horn, we have a parting line, and it's the worst of the three figures, is down the middle here. For seams, we have a very large seam on her wrist here, and where her necklace meets her dress. What's really exciting about this figure is the insane texture they've been able to create on her Virgin Killer sweater. It's on par with many of our scale figures. If they would have just added a dark wash, it would have been really stunning. On this figure, she's wearing boots instead of high heels, and they are modeled well with creases. The emblems and the zippers both look good. For her hair, they have added a piece back in, but there is more hair separation than the pop-up parade. Her base is arguably the best out of the three. It's a translucent plastic and it has Overlord Season 4, her name, and some design elements. For artistry, I feel like her face lands between the pop-up parade and the artist's masterpiece. It doesn't give me the ick that the pop-up parade does, but it's not as elegant as the artist's masterpiece. I do feel like they've captured her essence pretty well. It's a little on the derpy side, but they have recreated her droopy eyes. It's a pretty average cute figure to me, but I can appreciate that they made her breast more accurate than the other two. Objectively, once again, we will take the price that Senpai paid for it of 1,800 yen, and this figure weighs 171 grams. This gives it a price per gram of 10.53, which is once again a 5 out of 5. Subjectively, this figure is sub $15. Even here in the West at conventions, you can regularly find these figures for $20 or less. So if you like the design that they're going for, I think you'll be satisfied. For the comparison, since you've seen them all up close, we're only going to focus on a few key categories to compare them. We will have a simple chart ranking the figures for each category, first, second, and third, and the winner will have the lowest score. The key areas that we will be focusing on are paint, size, finish, hair, texture, and base. For the paint, it's basically a wash. Starting with the colorful, while she has no shading, she has the best skin finish out of all three. She has gloss paint on her horns, they painted her fingernails, and the emblems on her boots are very clean. For the Pop-Up Parade, while she has the most shading out of all three, I wish they would have chosen to add shading to her wings instead of her breast. Her horns are not glossy like they should be, her skin finish is the worst out of all three, and there's a lot of paint bleeding on her sash. For the masterpiece, the only shading is in her wings, but she does have gloss for her horns. While the skin finish is not as nice as the colorful, it's better than the Pop-Up Parade. Because there are many pieces added back into this figure, there's minimal paint bleeding. For the ranking, because each figure has its own pros and cons, we can't determine a clear hierarchy, and so we're not going to rank them in this category because we feel they're effectively even. For size, let's first talk about presence. Looking at all three of them together, it's very obvious that the Pop-Up Parade is both the smallest and the most closed off, while the masterpiece is both the tallest and the widest. A more objective way of looking at this is looking at our price per gram scale, with the masterpiece effectively costing 9 yen per gram, the colorful 10 yen per gram, and the Pop-Up Parade 20 yen per gram. So not only is she the smallest, you also get the least for your money. Our rating is going to follow that, with the masterpiece having the most presence and the most value, and in first place, followed by the colorful in second place, and then the Pop-Up Parade in third place. For the finish, we're going to be taking a look at the horns and the tasteful side boob. Starting with the colorful, her horns are generally smooth, but there is a very large part line towards the back, but her armpit and side boob are very clean. For the Pop-Up Parade, her horns are not smooth. There's a horrible part line down the middle with flashing, there's another horrible part line down her arm, and a noticeable one on her boob. And for the masterpiece, her horns are the smoothest of the three, and the part line is less noticeable because it's underneath. The part line on her arm is also less noticeable, but the one on her boob is just as noticeable as the Pop-Up Parade, but there's no flashing. Because the colorful shows the most skin out of all three and is still impressively smooth, she gets first place, followed by the masterpiece in second, and then the Pop-Up Parade in third. For the hair, ranking them is fairly straightforward. The colorful has the most consistent modeling from top to bottom, the Pop-Up Parade is very underwhelming, and the masterpiece has the most modeling and movement from here down, but no modeling on the dome of her head. And so the ranking goes masterpiece in first, followed by colorful in second, and the Pop-Up Parade in third. For texture, we're really talking about detail. The colorful only has a knit dress, but the texture in that dress is absurdly good. The Pop-Up Parade has very low definition in the barbs of the feathers on the bottom, and no definition on the top. The masterpiece has the most definition in the barbs of the feathers from top to bottom, and the detail is consistent throughout the figure. So our ranking is going to be masterpiece first, followed by colorful second, and then Pop-Up Parade third. For the base, the colorful is the only interesting one. It's a translucent plastic that's not a drab color, and it has graphic design elements. The Pop-Up Parade is a translucent hockey puck, and the masterpiece at least has some geometry and a line. So the ranking goes colorful first, masterpiece second, and Pop-Up Parade third. Looking at the total points, in first place with 7 points is the artist masterpiece, in second place with 8 points is the colorful, and the one that got third in every single category and is third overall with 15 points is the Pop-Up Parade. Taking a look at all three figures, whether you want the colorful or the masterpiece can be determined by your aesthetic and how much you want to spend. The colorful is the cheapest, but is not as intricate as the masterpiece. But the one consistency is that the Pop-Up Parade is just not as good and the most expensive. So let's talk about it. The only advantage I can see to Pop-Up Parades right now is the displayability that they talk about. Because the size is the same across all figures no matter the series, you can easily display them together and put them on a shelf without it looking weird due to size differences. Meanwhile, the colorful comes in all different poses and sizes, so it makes it harder to display. And the masterpiece tends to be more intricate, and so the size varies based on their intricacy and pose. So in that respect, the Pop-Up Parades are like Nindroids, but the one thing that Nindroids have always had going for them is consistent quality. Which brings us to another pain point of Pop-Up Parade. Chocolate and Vanilla came out 3 years earlier than Albedo, and if this review had been based off of them, it would have been a completely different story. We're not going to go into too many details, but take a look at these close-ups. While there's only shading in their hair, everything else is super clean. They have clean line work, intricate details, very little flashing, and they really just feel like miniaturized scales. They also have simple but colorful and matching bases, so I can understand why they garnered so much media attention at the time. 3 years down the road, now we have Albedo, who's being bested by prize figures and not delivering on promised quality. Just take a look at these prototype photos versus what we get here. And worst of all, their shtick is being able to display them together, but now they've gone and changed the base so they don't even match. It doesn't affect us because we display our figures based on series, and so we won't necessarily see Albedo next to Chocolate and notice that the bases are different. But I feel sorry for any avid pop-up parade collectors because now, potentially 3 years into collecting, they've changed the aesthetic on you. In conclusion, I know it sounds like we're being really harsh on pop-up parades, and there are redeeming qualities about them, such as quick production times. They are some of the first to put out new figures of new series. They do niche characters, they have a consistent height, they don't take up a lot of space, and you can consistently pre-order them, whereas prize figures are resold on the market. But we are frustrated. This was a series we liked the idea of, fell in love with Chocolate and Vanilla, but now it just feels like we're watching the downfall of a once good product, and honestly, there's just better prize figures out there. So I can only recommend you pre-order standard pop-up parades if any of the aforementioned reasons appeal to you. Honestly, not a good start to pop-up parade, at least for the standard size. We will save our conclusions on the brand for the final video, but we are more hopeful for the L series. They at least seem to be in their own category and filling a void. So be sure to look forward to part 2 and subscribe in order to see it. Reminder, we can't do this without Lonely Pillow. Dakimakura's once saved the owner's life, and now he's creating them for all the lonely people out there, or those that just want a little something extra to cuddle. Lonely Pillow is an honest and transparent company that supports both traditional and AI artists and has them clearly separated into 2 separate categories on their website, so you know who you're supporting. Kohai's collection takes a firm stance on supporting traditional artists only, so we have negotiated a coupon code, Kohai Review, for 13% off traditional art dockies only. This does not take from the artist royalty, the owner takes the hit. In return, you get to support traditional artists and gain a lovely waifu to cuddle with. There are several versions for each cover, and it's nice because they have both safe for work and not safe for work options for almost all covers for those of you who can't display all the goodies at home. Beside me, this is Chang Li by the artist Lami. This is the safe for work version with a modified 2-way tricot and is 160 centimeters in length. To us, it feels very similar to the Japanese 2-way tricot, but smoother and less stretchy. It's very soft and definitely the way to go. The not safe for work version is too spicy for YouTube and very unique, so be sure to check it out for yourself on the website lonely-pillow.com, and don't forget to use our coupon code Kohai Review for 13% off traditional art dockies. Well, until next time, senpai, bye!